So just when you think Tottenham can't, they surely can. They absolutely do. We've lost again, and somehow Thomas Frank is still here. So let's get straight into Tottenham 1, West Ham 2. So this is how Tottenham lined up. Obviously, the main news from this really was the debut of Conor Gallagher. Um, I think that was sort of expected with the sort of injury problems that we've had with Bentancur. I think Bergvall was on the bench for this one, which I was surprised. I didn't know that he was actually on the bench for this, as well as really the main talking points being that Dominic Solanke was back in the Premier League squad alongside Yves Bissouma, who we did eventually see in the second half. But this is how we lined up. Obviously, Muani coming in for Richarlison. I think that's sort of expected because obviously Richarlison suffered that hamstring injury, and if you are to believe the reports, they're suggesting that it's maybe going to be around 7 weeks that he's out with this hamstring injury. So, in terms of the lineup, I think other than really Ben Davies coming in to that starting 11, there wasn't much surprises. Obviously, Spence just getting a bit of a rest, but Ben Davies obviously having to eventually come off for Spence. But that was the team pre-game, so let's get to some of the talking points from the game. So there's a lot that was bad about that game on Saturday. Really, really poor performance. Sometimes there's games where you huff and you puff and you just don't get over the line. In this one, it was really, really bleak. Just a sort of performance that we've seen quite a lot this season, that we've sort of become accustomed to. Too little, too late, a bit of a half-hearted go at attacking once a game's sort of done. But there was a lot that was bad, and if I'm honest, I'm shocked really that Thomas Frank is still in the job. And I think the fact that it's got taken us to get to this point before there seems to be any sort of serious conversation being had about his position at the club, I think is very alarming. But the thing that really, really wound me up on Saturday was the subs. I really, really didn't get the subs at all. So the first half goes by, we're obviously 1-0 down, we're struggling. And then Archie Gray, who was, for me, our best player in the first half, he was really putting his foot in, not shying out of tackles, showing for the ball, playing some nice through balls, getting into the box when he can, doing, just the basics very well when no one else on the pitch was in the Spurs shirt. And then he comes off at half time, and I can only assume that was for some sort of knock or injury, because if it wasn't, then I don't know what game Thomas Frank was watching. Basuma come on. I thought he played quite well, if I'm honest. I don't think he was particularly amazing, but I think just generally the standard that we're sort of been operating at this season, I think he was above that sort of standard that we've seen in the past few games. But that's not to, go too overboard. I thought he played okay, but so that was the first sub, which I was frustrated at. And then the second sub comes, and Randall Kolo Muani, he's someone that I've tried to show patience with. He's had his injury issues. He's been a player which is sort of played on the left wing when his more natural positions through the middle, and we've not really seen him given a go through the middle. And then we've seen some against Aston Villa where he looked half decent, but still not great. And then today, Saturday it was, he just didn't look interested at all. And it was only sort of when the ball was within sort of close proximity, say maybe 5 or 10 yards of him, that's sort of then when he'd look to maybe find a bit of space, maybe drop a few yards or make a run in behind. And he really, really was playing poor. And I think everyone was sort of looking at that first half, looking at his performance and thinking, when's Dominic Solanke going to come on? Because it seems like a matter of time. And then Solanke does come on, but he comes on for Matisse Tell, who in the second half, up until that point, was our best player. He was pushing us forward. He was, like I said with Gray, just doing all of the basics that in a game like this are the sort of thing which get you back into the game. And then he's taken off. Why? and it's the second game in a row where Matisse Tell's been taken off, and there's been boos for Thomas Frank, and I don't know what he is not seeing with Matisse Tell, which he thinks Kolo Muani has, that he can play out on the left. But when Tell come off, Kolo Muani just stayed in the same position, and it was effectively like we were playing with two strikers and then no sort of left-sided threat at all, especially with Jed Spence coming on. The only sort of threat we had out on the left was Spence, and even then, every time there's a touch, most players know that he's right-footed, and 9 times out of 10 he's going to come in on the right-hand side. So it just made our left wing just completely redundant. And then even when Bergvall comes on, he comes on for Wilson Odobert, and I think at this point there's about 6 minutes to go. So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, what's the plan here? Because all season we've seen Bergvall be used as this sort of auxiliary right or left midfielder, which is just completely not his game. And then you're taking Wilson Odobert off, who on the right hand side is the only one offering any sort of width or attacking threat. And then, the cynic in me thinks that the only reason he brought Bergvall on was because there was long throws, and I think it's probably, maybe that's a bit of a cruel blow for me to add, but I genuinely believe that's why he come on. I've looking at the game. Every time there was more and more throw-ins, Danso was getting ready to come on, and then Bergvall was getting ready to come on, and if that's the logic, then why is he the guy to take us forward? If we're struggling to break down a team and we've got someone like Bergvall who helps in build up and opens teams up a bit more from a deeper position, moves the ball quicker, why is he not on until there's 5 minutes of added time? Because there wasn't any sort of signs that he was going to come on before we had a few long throw-ins in a row, which didn't work out. And I'm really just struggling to understand what sort of green shoots a hierarchy think they can see, because there's none. There's literally none. I tried really hard the other day to think about who would be our player of the season so far, and there's not one outstanding candidate, and that is very, very damning. I don't know, all the sort of rumours coming out of the club, or at least in the media, that Thomas Frank's going to get the chance to lead us against Dortmund. And I think, what sort of good do the club think can come from giving Frank a one-off game to save your job? If you got down to that position where it's a make or break, one sort of job can rest on one result, and it's not like a cup final, it's just a mid-season sort of game, you're already at the point of no return. And I think we've genuinely been there since probably that Chelsea game, and there just seems to be no news before this weekend about any sort of pressure or Spurs sniffing around other managers, or maybe losing faith in the manager. And having faith in your manager, it is by all means a good trait to have, and to give these managers time is what they need. And I'm making a hypocrite of myself, because earlier in the season, after we beat Man City, I was saying that Frank is the guy to give the time to. But sometimes you've just got to call a spade and just see that things aren't working out. It's not working out for us as fans, it's not working out for the players, as a club, and for Frank. And I do feel an element of sympathy for him that he's having this game against Dortmund, where everyone in the stadium knows that near enough that your employers don't fancy you, and it's almost like he's been fed to the wolves a little bit by being given this Dortmund game, and we're just delaying the inevitable. And I just feel lost. I feel like the game I'm watching, it feels like you're just watching it to get through it rather than enjoying Tottenham. And I think that is such a sad place to be. And this was the first game for a while where Dominic Solanke was back in a Premier League squad, the first time since we played Man City. And to think of the last time he was available in a Premier League squad, where we were mentally, I think where everyone thought we were going is completely different. And you know, he's now going to be available against Dortmund, one of the few players who will be, and this obviously means Matisse Tell drops out. And I think I'm genuinely at the point with Kolo Muani at the minute where I think if there's business to be done, that we can make a move for striker in January. I wouldn't be too bothered about if he did return to PSG, because we're just getting absolutely nothing from him at the minute, and it's a real shame because it's a player I had real high hopes for, and I feel like we're not getting the full Kolo Muani. I feel like he's definitely a much better player than this, but I don't think we're going to see it at Tottenham. He just looks disinterested. He, sort of, he fails to like give you like a little something, like, and it's, I feel like I'm saying a lot without actually saying anything here, but with Richarlison there's limitations, but pretty much when Richarlison's coming off the pitch, that by the time he leaves there's going to always be a grass stains around his top, and he puts himself about, and sometimes if a teammate goes down, he's one of the first to be there, sort of stand up. And I just feel like Kolo Muani, the player we've seen since he's come to Tottenham, has just been pretty timid and a bit disinterested. And I think, we've seen a lot better of him, a lot more of him against PSG when he had a point to prove. But other than that, it just seems like his head's not really at Tottenham at the minute. And there's an element of sympathy I have for him when you think that you're coming into a team which is not playing well. It's not really, as an attacking player, the sort of football that you'd want to play. But it just feels like at the minute we are just choosing him because he's available and because of his reputation. I really don't think he's warranting starting the team at the minute. And I think Dominic Solanke, there's always a risk that you don't want to, rush these players back like we seen last year with Ange doing with Van der Ven and Romero in that Chelsea game. But with Solanke, I'm obviously Tell's not going to be available, so I think Solanke's got to start against Dortmund, and I don't think it'll be over Kolo Muani because of the sort of selection problems that we're going to have. But ultimately, Kolo Muani is just not, he's not, I'd say he's not earning his place at the minute, and I don't think he's in there on meritocracy. I think he's in there at the minute based on reputation and just sheerly due to the lack of options. And I don't think he's going to be here permanently next summer. And I think that's probably, not just for Tottenham, but I think for Kolo Muani that's probably the right move, because I think, deep down he probably thought he was going back to Juventus. I know that was largely touted throughout the summer, but it couldn't be done for financial reasons. But Solanke, I feel like he's at a bit of a point where it's a bit of a crossroads for him, because he's had that first season, he's had injury issues. This year it's just been injury problems all along, and I think he actually had a really good season last year. I think he scored in some big games, the likes of struggling to think now, but Man United at Old Trafford, Chelsea at home, all these sorts of games. He scored quite a few in the Europa League for us, and I think overall generally we were a much better team when he was in the team last year. But there just seems to be something, not necessarily just with our strikers, but you know, the injuries. As soon as you feel like you've got Richarlison fit and firing, and maybe he wasn't playing his best, but he's still getting goals and being effective more so than we've seen from him throughout most of his Tottenham career. And then the injury comes, and the problem I mentioned about I wouldn't mind if we were to send Kolo Muani back is, do you then take the gamble of sending Kolo Muani back and relying on Solanke to stay fit whilst Richarlison, who himself has had injury issues, comes back from injury? Because then I think you're in a tough place. But overall, I think we've got a gamble on Solanke. We can't, yes, you don't want to rush these players back, but also the assets. This is a £60 million player that we've signed. How long can we afford to nurse him back in, especially when we're losing points when the rest of the league seems to be gaining points? And I think, Frank's hand is going to be a little bit forced against Dortmund to play Solanke because of surely due to sort of options or lack of options available to him. But I think Solanke's got to come into the team for the Burnley game. I'll be looking at having that three behind the striker of Xavi through the middle, Tau on the left, Odubel on the right, and then Solanke through the middle. Because at the minute, Kolo Muani's he's just not the guy. Another bad thing to come out of this game is that Ben Davies, who was getting a rare start, looks like he suffered a really, really bad injury. He was down for quite some time. I think he went in on Bowen, and the angle you didn't really see what happened, but it looked like something that was maybe to do with like his shin or lower. I think the sort of news that's been coming out is that it's a broken ankle or a fractured ankle, which if so, that might be the last we've seen of Ben Davies in a Tottenham top. And I think it's only right that we sort of acknowledge Ben Davies for what he was more than what he wasn't. I think he was brought into, the club as the sort of replacement for Danny Rose. Danny Rose ultimately pushed on as a result of Davies' competition and got to a point where Rose was one of the best left backs in the league, from 2015 to around 2017. And Davies was really pushed him hard, the same way Trippier was with Walker. And then, Rose has this sort of injury, and then the big interview with the Sun, yada yada yada. And Davies, when I think now to when he first come in, his role's always sort of been the same as that sort of backup left back, and then I guess more towards the end of his Spurs career or the latter stages, be moved sort of inside into the sort of left-sided centre back role. And I think he's a player which probably won't get his flowers from most Tottenham fans, just because he's not glamorous. He's not, from a really exotic footballing nation. He's, in the most respectful way possible. He's quite boring in the sense that he's never in, news stories, which I think is a good thing. He's never, you never have to worry about, how his, how he comes across as a Tottenham player. And I feel like he's someone that really, really represents just the club really well. He's been such a long servant of the club. Been here for nearly, it is over 10 years now. Our longest serving player, and he's been through quite a bit with Tottenham. He's there through the Pochettino sort of arc from the very start of that as one of Pochettino's first signings. I think it might have actually been the first signing. Through to Mourinho, to Conte, to Nuno, to Ange, for Bilbao, for Frank. Now he's been through a lot of it, and I don't think he was ever the sort of, I'm not speaking about him as if his footballing career is over, but just reflecting on him, I don't think he'll get his flowers. I feel like he's the sort of player who every squad needs, someone who's just quite dependable, happy to sort of be in the background, train, model pro, and just come in, do a job, help people integrate. And I don't think it's a coincidence that everybody speaks so highly of him. Um, over 100 caps for Wales, and I think he's going to look back on his career as a really good one, um, at the top level, or at least with Spurs, and obviously his achievements with Wales. I don't think that's him like done as a footballer. So I'm very like I don't want to come across as patronising, but yeah, really, if that's the way that Ben Davies' Spurs career is to end, I think that's a really, really sad way for it to go. I think everyone was pretty much in agreement that this would be his last season at Spurs. I know there was some rumours about him leaving in the summer just gone, but I think Tottenham extended or triggered a contract clause to extend for another year. But yeah, I think it's a really sad way to go for someone who I don't think has ever really been a fan favourite, but I don't think he's ever done anything which, you know, would, hurt Tottenham in his reputation or anything like that. He's just been such a good, you know, ambassador for our club. And, that's not to completely talk down his footballing ability. I think when the Danny Rose interview back in 2017 with the Sun and Rose's injury, the second half of that 16-17 season, he come in and he was really, really dependable. And then through to the 17-18 season, I think that was probably his best year in the Tottenham top. And then, once Rose sort of comes back in and there's a sort of struggle of, I guess, between Pochettino, first, season in the new stadium, and then under Mourinho he becomes this sort of elbow left back where Aurier would push forward and then Davies would tuck in, and then even through to Antonio Conte. I think of that Conte team, one of the best sort of elements I can remember when first watching his first game against Vitesse was about Ben Davies flying forward and showing an attacking purpose, which I think a lot of us had forgot about. But under Pochettino, his attacking game improved a lot, and I think he's someone who's a really good really good deliverer of the ball, and I don't think he got credit enough for that by Spurs fans. But overall, just wishing Ben Davies the best of luck and hoping that he can get back in the Spurs top if possible before the end of the year. But it's looking unlikely, and I'm just hoping, just for him, that that's not his World Cup dreams over either. And obviously at the start of the video I said one of the big talking points was Conor Gallagher making his debut, and then I proceeded to not talk about him. We are going to talk about Conor Gallagher. In terms of a debut, I don't think he was amazing. I'm sort of reserving judgment just because it's first game. We're not in a good position at the minute. The squad is looking pretty thin in terms of availability. So we sort of come in at the worst possible time. But yeah, I think it was just a bit sloppy, just in terms of just being a yard or two off it, in terms of when to press, when to jump out, and that sort of thing. And I don't think he was bad. I think he just sort of had a bit of an off day. And I think, if at halftime when Gray did come off and Basuma was coming on, I did think, if you were to sub one of the two, it probably would have been Gallagher for Basuma. But I don't think he was playing bad enough that you take him off. I don't think he was actually bad. I just don't particularly think he was great that game, and I think it was purely a symptom of a dysfunctional team playing in a stadium which hasn't felt like home at all for quite some time now. And I don't think games like yesterday are going to be that's going to define his Spurs career. It's not going to at all. I think once we can start building some momentum, whether that be under Thomas Frank or someone else, I feel like then we're going to start to see a bit more of Conor Gallagher. We're going to start to see the best of him. The player that does get into the England team that has an eye for goal and is this all action midfielder. And I think, to his credit, I think he was actually, because of the sort of type of personality, that we've seen from him on a football pitch, he does like to sort of lead by example sometimes and maybe sort of try and, set the tempo in terms of the press or passing forward and things like that. And I just think he was maybe a little bit too eager to impress, and that might be maybe why we didn't see the best of him. But also, you know, it wasn't great from anyone necessarily on Saturday. So I'm reserving judgment. I think he's going to be a good player for us. Obviously, he can't play on Tuesday against Borussia Dortmund, but I think he's gonna eventually find his feet at Spurs, and I think when he does find his feet, I think we're gonna have a real fan favourite on our hands, because I like Conor Gallagher. I don't necessarily think he's the profile that this Spurs team is missing at the minute, purely because I think we are missing that deeper midfielder who can pass a bit more and sort of do a bit of defensive action as well. But that's not Conor Gallagher's fault at all. That is the fault of sort of bad squad planning from the manager or the director of football, whoever runs it. Basically, the powers that be. But either way, yeah, reserving judgment, because I think it's only a matter of time before we see the best of Conor Gallagher in the Tottenham top. So that was it. Another game, another loss, another home loss. All felt very, very predictable whilst feeling completely unbelievable at the same time. But that's the sort of feeling that Tottenham gives you, and yeah, where we go from here, I'm not too sure, to be honest, whether it's an interim towards the end of the year, because I think even with Enoch's blessing, I don't think Thomas Frank is going to get us to a position by the end of the season where there's any sort of tangible positive to take from it. But another home loss is getting ridiculous now. Nuno Espirito Santo has won 2 games in the last 9 months at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and that is the same amount that we've won in the Premier League in the last 9 months. That's not good enough. And with the prices, that they are, and the sort of roller coaster that we're put through as fans, I think the board are going to have some tough questions to ask, and it's time for them to take action, because actions speak louder than words. I know Vinay Venkatesham come out and sort of said that we're looking to be proactive in January and that sort of thing, but I think the first thing they need to address is the fact that we're in trouble at the minute. We're not picking up points. I feel like the rest of the league is starting to pick up points around us, and whilst we've got a somewhat comfortable buffer from the bottom 3, if it goes on like this, then we are going to be dragged into an uncomfortable battle. But whilst there is problems at the top, this team and this team, I feel like we're not, one managerial appointment can change things very quickly, and then even then, there's only a couple transfer windows away from being a really fun, enjoyable team again. And I think that's the thing to take away. I think whilst all this is happening and we're losing every week, and we're sort of in this sort of echo chamber of social media where it's just flat out negativity, which what is there to be positive about at the minute? But once you sort of take time to evaluate, and you think and you look at the sort of players that we have and how they might have shined for other clubs or shined for previous managers at Tottenham, things aren't as bleak at the minute. Well, they are bleak at the minute, granted, but that's not going to be the way forever if we can get the next managerial appointment right and take action and replace Frank. But we're moving on to the Dortmund game, which is tomorrow night, and I think that could be Frank's last game, but I also could, something Spursy in us, I could see us getting that win and giving Frank a bit of breathing room and maybe giving him the Burnley game. But either way, something needs to change. Let's hope for a change in fortunes on the pitch and for a win against Borussia Dortmund to, cement ourselves at least in the playoffs, I think it is, and then hopefully in that top 8 as well. So until then, I'll see you after the Dortmund game, and that was Spurs.